All right. So hey, everyone. Again, my name is Paul Ruiz, and I'm a developer programs engineer on Firebase over at Google. So I actually work technically right now from Broomfield, but originally out of the Boulder office. So today's talk is going to be a little bit more different than what I initially planned, so that'll be okay. It was going to be kind of an intro to Flutter and Firebase, but what we're going to do instead is I'm going to switch over to just kind of focusing on how you can use Firebase with Flutter. And then I'm going to try to do some live examples and show you the actual code. So I actually have my IDE up and my emulator and the console and all that good stuff. So we're going to do that. And since it is a relatively smaller crowd too, if people have questions, I'm totally cool if you just like turn off your mic or turn on your mic and like say, ask your question in the middle of this. Kind of keep it more as a conversation as we're going along. So yeah, there's no reason to be super formal. Yep. Oh, cool. So let's see. First thing I wanted to go over though was just kind of the official pitch for Firebase, just so we actually know what we're actually talking about and working with and whatnot. So Firebase is an application development platform with a mission to help developers succeed by using Firebase products. Firebase accomplishes this by taking common problems and developer tasks that occur during a product's lifecycle and making them easier to solve, be it by providing more information about your apps and their performance, or providing tools to handle complex problems like security and network connectivity when storing data. So Firebase is actually divided into three main categories of tools with specific goals. So the first one is to help you build better apps by making complex coding processes easier, improving app quality by helping you catch issues early and fixing them quickly, and helping you grow your app by understanding how people are using it and engaging with them in meaningful ways. So there's like 20 different products or so. Because of that, I'm actually not going to go into all of them in depth. I'm just going to basically focus on the build ones because that is what you would use for building something quickly over a hackathon weekend and whatnot. And just actually using kind of leverages the strengths of Flutter versus Firebase, where Firebase is kind of good for your back-end quick development, whereas Flutter is amazing for front-end quick development. So before you can get started with Firebase, you actually need to set everything up within the Firebase console. So we actually have a site called console.firebase.com. It's kind of similar to the Google Cloud Console, where essentially what you're going to do is you're going to type in your project name, hit next a bunch of times, and then you should end up on this sort of a dashboard. So once you've done that, you actually need to add, link up your Flutter project to Firebase. So I'm going to break away from the slides here and go to the actual console. So I have one that I have created a couple weeks ago now, but I completely removed every app from it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add the app. I'm going to select an Android one. I'm going to go down to Android Studio, and I just need to grab the package name for this one. So it's just this COM Google Firebase Flutter Fire Quick Start. This app isn't actually publicly out there yet, but I'm working on it. So you get a little early view of what's there. And then you can also add this SHA-1 key. So the SHA-1 key is optional. I actually recommend people not install or use it unless they're going to use dynamic links or Google sign-in, because there are some complications that can come up if you need to migrate from one Firebase product to another with the same signing certificate and package name. But I'm going to go ahead and just use that real quick. And I think that's actually the correct SHA-1 for my device. So this is something I always have to look up as well.
Can I ask a quick question with the SHA-1? Is that required if you're going to use Google Login?
It is required if you can use Google Login or Dynamic Links. And I think those are the only two. Oh, and Phone Off. Those are the only products that actually officially require it. Everything else you can get by without it.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me grab that. I don't know anyone who doesn't have to Google how to find their SHA-1 certificate. So that's just kind of is what it is. I am going to add it for this demo because I'm going to use it for both dynamic links and auth as we go along with this. And then if you don't use it initially, you can actually go back and re-add it afterwards. So I'm going to download the Google JSON or Google Services JSON file. And what's going to happen with that is I'm going to just go back into Android Studio. And then under the app, you go to the Android area and then app. And so I have an old one there that I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of. I'm going to copy this over. Not going to worry about Git. And I'm going to just set that to run. So this is the original app. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And this might take a second to assemble. It's Android. It is what it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come back over here, grab my slides. Let's see. You can do very similar things with iOS. Essentially, just put in your bundle name, and then you register the app, and then you add something to a plist file. I'm not going to duplicate that process because I just don't have Xcode and everything set up, so it'd be a little pointless for everybody. So the first feature I want to go over, though, is authentication. So while it's not the most flashy feature, there's always that one hackathon judge that's going to ask you about security, or if you're trying to make an app that you're trying to sell to somebody, they're going to ask you about security. So since it is fairly simple to throw in there, we just kind of might as well. So Firebase authentication will allow your users to log into your app using a username and password, phone number, third-party identity provider, so like Google sign in, GitHub has one, Facebook, Twitter, a few other ones, or other options like anonymous session ID or phone off. But rather than going into all of those all at once, I'm just going to focus on email password, email link, and Google sign in. Let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to the console instead of actually talking about this from the slide aspect. So what you would do is just go to this little authentication part under Develop in Firebase. And if you go to the sign-in methods, you'll see I don't have anyone registered right now. I've already cleared that out. There it goes. So you can go ahead and just select email and password, and what that will do is it'll bring up this little screen where you can toggle enable on it. So the first one would just be registering a user with their email and password and letting them sign in with that. And then the second one is what you use for passwordless sign-in, which essentially what this will do is it will send an email with a link to them, and then they can open up the app through that using dynamic links, which is essentially just a way to deep link into your app from a URL that's sent to them. So once those are enabled, though, we can just go ahead and save. And then let's see if this went. Yep, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and just come over here. We can see that we actually don't have any users going yet. So I'm going to go ahead and just test register. And add one. I'm going to use the world's most secure password. And my computer's kind of driving while I stream this, so hopefully that's okay. Let's see if that worked or not. Well, something is not right. So I'm going to go ahead and just kill this because it might have an issue with needing to know what it is. I need to do the whole Flutter clean. If I can remember the location for this. Does anyone have any questions too while I'm actually finding this, so I'm not just stumbling here on the screen for you? If not, that's totally
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, this is Tim Brown. Sorry, I'm supposed to be a senior software engineer, but I can't figure out how to get my Bluetooth headset and mic to work at the same time.
Oh, no worries. Let's see.
I do have a question. Have you worked with Apple sign-in?
I have not yet. That's actually on my list for next week.
Because is it true that now when you submit an app to the App Store, if you use third-party login, you have to include Apple login?
I would have to go ahead and ask somebody about that. I am not 100% sure on that. Is that something that's going to be new with iOS 14?
Yeah, I've heard,
they just announced that? Or?
I've heard, yeah, that is absolutely correct. That if you're going to have any third-party sign-ins, the Google Mail, what Apple requires you to have theirs as well.
Gotcha. That's what I had heard. Just yeah. Okay.
And I've seen a number of articles recently on Medium within the last month that all show you how to add it. So there's a ton of information out there.
There's a plugin that exists for it as well.
Nice. Well, I'm just kind of curious now to see if we have that enabled or not. So we do have Apple sign-in enabled. I haven't played with it yet. So it is available within the Firebase authentication options as well.
I did get it set up through Firebase.
Oh, nice.
It was the Firebase part was easy.
Is that also free?
It should be, yeah.
Okay.
So the way we actually do pricing, let's see if I can pull that up here. I think the first like 10,000 or something are free, and then you pay like a cent for every X amount of them. Let's see, authentication. Oops, hold on.
I thought auth was free forever. Okay.
So no, it's free for every 10,000, and then it's a
Okay.
cent for verification after that. But you still always get that 10,000 first initial set.
That looks like it's just for phone off, though.
Oh, you know what? You might be right. I'm sorry. I was totally thinking it did include all that. I'll have to double check on that. But yeah, you actually might be right. We might actually have it set up so it's free for the third-party ones.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've hit way more than that 10K mark, and it's free.
Gotcha. Let's see. Well, this is going to take its sweet time, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of move along with the slides, because what I did do is include code in here as well. And then we can come back and hopefully it'll be up and running by the time we're ready for it. So again, using the email sign-in, it's actually super easy on the Firebase side for it. Essentially what you're going to do is just call this create user with email and sign-in, or email and password method. You just pass in the actual email and password. Let me see if I have my little pointer guy there. I don't know if you can see my mouse around, so I'm going to use that. And what that's going to do is it's going to return a Firebase user, which is going to have their user ID number, which is what you can use for like security rules or putting people's information in like the proper protected nodes and whatnot within the database, which we'll kind of start discussing here in a little bit. And again, this is all asynchronous, which is kind of nice. So if you need to call it from the future or what have you, totally possible. And then signing in is basically the same exact thing, but you're just going to use the sign in with email and password instead of register. And it'll do the same exact thing where it'll return that Firebase user, which will give you all the information that you need for that. So email link is where things get a little bit more interesting though. So this is where you're going to have to actually enable the email link option from the console, which is the screen that we were just looking at. And then you also have to enable dynamic links. So essentially what you're going to do is just put in your own URL that will be used for deep linking into your application. And this will end up being sent to like Firebase backend to let them know, hey, I want to authenticate this user. Here's whatever behind the scenes credentials to do that and link them to those deep links so that they can be sent in through their email. So that's going to just all come from this send sign in with email method. And you're going to just give them the user's email, your actual deep link URL, the package name, and then it'll kind of do everything automatically for you, which is pretty nice. And then what should happen is they'll receive this email with the sign-in link. And then once they click on that, they'll be sent back into your app where you can start handling the process for them. So I'm just kind of curious to see if, there we go. With some luck, and if not, it is what it is. I haven't done a live demo on this in a while, so let's see. Okay, perfect. So that actually successfully registered. So if I come back to the users, we'll see that it's there, and it's showing that I've signed in with the actual email address. So what I'm also going to do here, I'm going to leave it out there, but we can see that this is the user's UID. So it's that DFZ2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the sign-in page, completely sign out. And if we signed in, it would be the same exact thing where it just says, hey, they signed in. It's going to be that ID. But what's a little bit more interesting is if I go ahead and add this here for the aspect of it, submit that. And then what should happen, let's see. So it turns out running an IDE, a live stream, and an emulator completely kills your computer. It's not that one. Go back.
I'm sure the graphics card in your computer is sweating the stream right now.
Oh yeah, my poor little laptop. That's okay. We'll come back to that later, or it'll give me a notification to tell me that it came through. But anyways, that's what this slide was showing, where I would get this email, we would click this link, and then what it would do is it would just open up the actual application for us. So what will happen there is we're just going to call the did change app lifecycle state method, which hopefully people are familiar with. It just kind of handles a lot of the lifecycle aspects of a Flutter application. So when the app is resumed, this will be popped up. We're going to check to see if it was resumed. And then we're going to use this pending dynamic link data object to get the initial link that was used for the deep linking. And if that exists, then we're going to actually handle that. And essentially what we do with that is we just take the URI and then pass that information in from there against the sign in with email and link method, and that will return the Firebase user for us. And then all we have to do is update the state and the UI and whatnot end up changing with it. And then Google sign-in is, I don't know, it's a little bit more interesting. It's a little bit more fun. This is actually one where you would sign in by using the Google email address that's associated with the phone, or if the user's already logged in. You can do the same thing with Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, but each of them is going to have its own caveats to how it's actually set up. So for this case, you're actually going to use a Google sign-in account or instance that's already going to be instantiated. You call sign in on that, and what that does is it gives you the Google user that's associated with that phone. And you get the authentication credentials from that. And then you can actually link your Google credentials to Firebase in order to give you, let's see where they go here. Okay, so yeah, it brings up one of these screens when you go into a sign in with it. And then that'll be able to be converted over into a Firebase user. One of the things that's kind of cool with that, so you can see we just have the email provider that's listed for this email. So if I come back over here, I'm going to try to sign in with Google. So that's the screen that'll just pop up. That's all kind of automatically given to you for UI. And you see it's actually the same DSC2 user. So even though they've already signed in with their email and password, we can link to the same exact user based off that email address. And since Google is actually a more trusted identity provider, it's going to take precedence over someone who just puts in a random email and password. So what will happen is that email icon is actually gone, and now we trust Google more, so that we kind of assume that they have a higher level of trust with their authentication. Cool beans. So yeah, did anyone have any questions on that aspect that I kind of rushed through a little bit, but I could totally go into more detail on any of those parts if anyone's interested. Cool. Yeah, if not, then I guess I'll kind of move over to the Firebase real-time database. So this is actually one of two available database options that are within Firebase. Firebase real-time database is the older of the options. It's basically what Firebase was before Google picked it up and added 19 other products to it. So what this does is it uses a JSON tree that's stored up on the backend aspect of it, and you're able to traverse that JSON tree to pull your data and whatnot, but it also have listeners attached to it so you can get real-time updates. It does handle offline operations for you, and as soon as things come back online, it'll resync and either push data up or pull down, update, and all that good stuff. Firebase real-time database also has presence support, which is pretty cool. So you can use the API to see if users are on specific nodes. So a lot of people use that for multiplayer games and so forth, which is just kind of cool. The only difference, or the biggest difference though, is that you have less concurrent connections and more limited queries compared to the next option, which is Firestore. But we'll kind of get into that a little bit more as we get there. So I just want to kind of break away and show you what that looks like in the console aspect here too. So again, we have the two different database options. So I'm going to go into the real-time database. And what this is it's just literally a JSON tree. So I have one in here, it's called counter, and then an array of things, which is, or a list, which is messages. Each of these just has a UID, and then it just has some text and a counter that goes with it. So anytime something is added to this messages array, it's basically just going to take whatever the counter number is and append it to the end, so we can kind of keep track of how many items are added and whatnot. Let's see, so as far as code for that, essentially you're going to retrieve your database. It's just going to use this Firebase database where you pass in the app for it, which is context. You do have to import this plugin. It's completely separate than just like the core stuff. You have to do the same with Octo as well. I should mention that earlier, that's okay. And then you're going to get a reference to one of those nodes. So what this one is going to be is that messages array that we had just shown you there. And then what you can do is you can also read just once. So this is going to be the references for the counter node. I'm going to just read that once, get the data snapshot. And then once I am connected and I have that, I'm going to go ahead and just display it as a print value, just to kind of demo that you can read just one time instead of having to consistently listen. The next thing too is you can actually pull items off of that reference, and I only pull off about 10 of them at a time for now. But what it's going to do is it's going to listen for any kind of operation that happens on that node that you're listening for. So in this case, it's going to be on child added. So when something is added, I'm just going to go ahead and print out, hey, a child was added to it. And if there's an error, we'll also handle that point. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that. This next part is actually talking about the Firebase animated list. It's just an animated list. It's just automatically tied into Firebase, so it'll automatically update and add items or take them away. So it's kind of using some of the features that are available in Flutter and then just kind of upgraded to use this particular data set, which if you aren't familiar with animated lists, totally worth learning about. I actually like them over normal lists because you don't have to deal with the animation aspect, and it looks really good. Let's see here. So what I'm going to do here, manage that out. Let's see, I don't have better touch tool up, but that's okay. I'm going to come back over here, and then we're going to go to the real-time database. So you can actually see all the items that are in here, which is kind of nice. Let's see, I don't have these set up to delete right now, but what I can do is just start taking them out here. Okay. I'm going to just get rid of all of those, and this will update in real time across any device that's listening to that node. And if I start adding them on the device, you can actually see them popping up on the back end with this. And if I had multiple devices up, they would all be listening to the same exact data and updating in real time. You see that button tap. There's also the counter as well. So that'll update at the same exact time as we're adding all of these items. And then if I had actually had my delete feature in here, you'd be able to see deleting as well within real time. One other thing that's kind of cool about this is we have security rules that are set up. So what can happen is you can set it up so that a user has to be authenticated in order to write to this database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to authentication, to the sign in, sign out page, and I'm going to sign out. So if you remember, I had just signed in using Google. But I'm going to come back to the real-time database after signing out. And let's see here. What it's doing right now is it just has the old cached information on here. But that'll be there, and I don't think that should update. Maybe it did. That's okay. I might need to play with my security rules. So again, this is something I haven't live demoed in a while. But essentially what would happen is you can use security rules to basically say, this. I have it set up so anyone can read and write, which is completely different than what I would want. So now that I've updated that security rule, we can see that there's an error retrieving the button count, and things just aren't going to change here without being authenticated and logged in. But if I go back and I log in, then everything should start working again, which is kind of nice. So it's just kind of a super easy way to make sure you have some security in place and to be able to work with that with your data. And it gets kind of iffy. That's okay. This is a test app. It's not completely available yet. So the next one that I was going to go over, though, is Cloud Firestore, which is another offering for a database. What this one does, though, is it actually uses documents and collections rather than a JSON tree, so that you can access everything in a little bit more of an organized fashion. And it also has a lot more support for queries. So if you have very particular nodes that you're looking for, you do that. You can also use references. So you're not actually duplicating information back and forth all over the place, which is pretty nice. And then it also has the offline handling and auto scaling. The scaling one's kind of interesting. So what will happen is Firestore itself will scale no matter how many users you're adding to it and how much data you're storing. Whereas the real-time database, once you hit 100,000 users actively hitting it and concurrent users and whatnot, it'll start to stall out and get a little slow. But what you can do is you can do sharding. But then you have to restructure data and make sure you're actually using the database set up correctly to be efficient, which if you're running into that issue in a production app, it's not the best thing because then you have to actually go through and update your client code and all this other stuff. Whereas with Firestore, it's just going to automatically handle all of that for you. So similar to the real-time database, you're just going to get an instance of the actual database object. And for this one, you're going to use a collections reference to get the messages out of it. And if you want to do any kind of writing to it, all you're going to do is basically say, hey, I'm going to add this mapped object, so in this case, it's a string key to a dynamic, into the actual database for it. If you want to read, all you have to do is call get documents from whatever the reference path is that you're using. That will return all the documents out of that path. And if you want to be a little bit more intricate with it and actually have live updates and whatnot, you can use a stream builder by passing in the Firestore stream, which will just return a bunch of snapshots. And as that updates, it'll go through and basically handle the cases as they come in and are new. So for this one, what I'm using is just a list view builder that's going to take all those snapshots and use that as the items within that list. So again, basically just get the document snapshot, pull out whatever information you want from it. And then for this one, I'm just setting it as text within a list tile. So let's see here. I'm assuming this actually works. It does, cool. So we can actually see that information there. Bring back the right console. Let's switch this over to Cloud Firestore. You can actually have both of these database types running in the same project too, which is pretty nice. So these are the two that I had just added. And then you see if I just keep adding more. And this one I actually might need to refresh for you to see it in the console, but if I had a listener set up, it would come through. So you can see the new values that have been added to it. And then I want to say, it should just update on its own, but maybe not. I don't think I have a listener set up for this one. Yeah, but that's okay. But you can also do batch writes, you can use transactions, a whole bunch of other features to prevent people kind of stepping on each other's feet and whatnot as well when you're working with this information. And then I had actually mentioned references earlier, so I'm going to just show you another project I have that's doing that, which is kind of cool. So normally with like a NoSQL database, you're going to do a whole bunch of duplication to make sure the information is available when you want it, where you want it. So for this one, I actually have all these. I only have 4 words right now, so it's not all, but a couple different words in Mandarin that have been saved in a dictionary. And then the Chinese proficiency exams have their own set categories of words that are available for each of those that they test you against. So what I'm doing is I'm just using a reference back to that dictionary. So that's the actual source of truth for everything. And then I just have to point back to it. So rather than having to duplicate information, it's just going to point to that reference item. And then anytime I add information to it, the original item, it'll just be available within my app. So that's actually what I'm doing with, let's see. Come on, buddy. Back. So all the HSK ones are going to have these, and this is where I would be able to say, hey, here's the English and Pinyin version of it. And that's all going to be available within the actual dictionary. And then plus you get a nice little example of a transform animation of Flutter, which I thought was fun. I actually just learned how to use this last week. I've been a lot more on the back end side of things, so cool beans. Does anyone have any questions on real-time database or Firestore over here?
Yeah, hi Paul, this is Michael. I do have a question on the databases. So
Yep.
When I did my first Flutter project, the Firestore kept saying this is beta and whatever. And so since I was working for a client, I went with the more, tried and true existing real-time database and stuff. And yeah, it was pretty straightforward and simple looking at the JSON. But moving forward, as the Cloud Store became released and available. One thing you just said in this presentation that I thought was really interesting that I hadn't considered was, oh yeah, you can use both of them in your project. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. But I've never been really clear what is the decision tree for, oh, should I use real-time database for this problem, or should I use Cloud Firestore? Can you talk to that at all?
Yep. So I actually get this question every single time I do this presentation. So I put together a slide for it.
Yeah, you can send me the money later.
That way. So basically the data model structure is the biggest differentiating point there. So if you just need something that's going to be real quick, real simple, real-time database is going to be great for that. Real-time database is also a lot faster. I think it takes, oh man, it's still like a fraction of a second, or like it's only so many milliseconds compared to Firestore, which is I think like 100 times slower, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still less than a second for loading in data. But when you're dealing with things like games, that time difference makes a huge difference for people. So that's where a lot of that will come in. Present support is also another big one. So if you need to know who is attached to what node and what they're listening to, then real-time database is going to be what you'd want to use in that situation. If you're not as interested in those aspects and you just need to be able to query a little bit more complex data, then Firestore is going to be better for you there. Regions is another one that's a little bit more nuanced. So real-time database is only available in a US central location. So if you're using it in Europe, you're still going to have to go and hit that US central server to get your information and whatnot off of there. Whereas Firestore is going to be available in multiple different regions. So if you have somebody who's in Jakarta, they can actually hit the Indonesian, Southeast Asia servers instead. So it'll be a little bit faster for their users. And then the other one was just scaling and pricing. So again, I talked about how real-time database doesn't scale as easily as Firestore, but then real-time database is also on a different pricing plan. I don't want to necessarily say cheaper, but it costs less for the read and writes, and they charge you more on like the bandwidth that you're using and storage compared to Firestore, where it's cheaper for storage and saving a lot of data, but then it costs a little bit more for actually pulling everything down. So we have this actual document, which is pretty sweet. Let me see if I can just copy that link here. So yeah, we have this real-time database versus Firestore documentation, where they'll go over all of the actual nuanced, like here's the differences in data models, real-time offline support, querying, reliability and performance. They're both in like 99-point-something% reliability, which is great. So this hasn't been as big of a deal. Yeah, all that information would be kind of there if you want to run through that decision tree.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. That's good information. Thank you.
Yep, welcome. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just move on to the next one here. So cloud storage, honestly, it's more for when you want to store stuff that isn't text and just general, very basic information. So if you want to save like a text file, or a lot of people use it for images, video files, that sort of thing. This is kind of what you would want to use for this. So it actually handles uploads and downloads. It also does this really cool stuff where if you lose your internet connection in the middle of uploading or downloading, it'll resume as soon as it has that connection back. There's a lot of error handling that's already in there for you. Everything scales automatically. It does do some caching, which is great too. So if you're pulling an image from storage and then something's going on with your code where it requests it again, if that's not changed, it'll just kind of keep using the same one that's there. But that's all kind of automatically hidden in the back end of it. So for this one, let's see. So the easiest example is always uploading a file because there's a lot less to it. So you're going to have your actual storage reference item, similar to what you do with a real-time database or Firestore. You're going to say, hey, here's the child within the actual file structure on storage. You give it the file name that you want to pull down. So in this case, it's just going to be some uid.txt, or send up, I should say. And you can use put file, put data, whatever method you're going to use on that reference. There's a couple of them that are available depending on what kind of information you want to put up there. Let's see. All right, almost had a sneeze there. So for put file, it's where you're actually going to put a file up on storage. If you just had a byte stream, then you use put data. You can also give it this storage metadata. So if you wanted to associate other information with that file, it's all completely there. So if you want to upload files, it's only to use, what is this here? 6, 7, 8, about 10-ish lines here. And then you're good to go as soon as you've set up with Firebase, which is pretty nice. Downloading is also relatively straightforward. So you're just going to give it the path that you want to grab, that storage reference for the file that you want. And then what this will do is essentially you can just use HTTP and then get on that URL, and that will retrieve it. So in this case, I'm just pulling down that text file, pulling down the metadata that was associated with it, and then displaying it in a snack bar. So I can actually show you that part working here, though. And if anyone wants to see this in the IDE too, this is all the code snippets that are in the slides are actually in the IDE as well. So I have this text directory. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this because we don't need it for what we're doing. And we're going to upload and generate a whole new one. So let's see, storage is right there. So I created that, 12 bytes uploaded. I'm going to refresh with some luck. So yeah, there's the file that we had just uploaded. And if I go ahead and download it, it'll actually display the contents that are in there as well as all the metadata in this snack bar that comes through. And I think we have, yeah, there's some other options in here and whatnot that might not be quite working. Unless that clear, that might have been a clear option. No, I don't know. I'll have to go back and remess with that too. But essentially that's all that there is to storage. It's super straightforward, which is nice. Yeah, does anyone have any questions on that? And if not, I can go ahead and move on to the next bit here. Cool. So we actually talked about cloud functions for a minute just before the meetup actually started. So for those of you that don't know, is essentially just little snippets of code that you can run on the back end rather than having to set up your whole own back end. You can kind of think of them like Lambdas and AWS if you're familiar with that. But essentially what it is TypeScript or JS, and it's all just going to be hosted out there on Firebase. Then you can hit those with HTTP request, or our SDK is able to kind of handle all that for you as well. So in this example, I have just a button that'll, you hit that and it'll hit the function I put out on Firebase. And then what it'll do is it'll send back an echo request essentially saying hello, and then give you a counter or a date or what have you. So if you want to see the code that I have running there, let's see where I throw that. It's essentially just that. So this one is super straightforward. It's basically you bring in the Firebase function namespace, and then we just have this HTTPS on request. So when this URL gets hit, the URL is generated by Firebase. So you can actually find that in the console, which we'll get to. But all it's going to do is create a date object and then return a hello message that then gets logged out here and then sent back. So if I come back to functions, I'm just going to send a request. It might take a couple seconds for the first run, just because everything has to start on a cold start here. And it's just generating random numbers from the one that I actually have up right now. But once it's already set up and running, it's super fast, which is great. And then again, it only took a couple seconds to actually start up from a cold boot. But for this, let's see. You can see that I just had that one hello world method set up there. It's up on US Central 1. And this is the actual link that's there. So if I wanted to hit this from a browser rather than just from an app using the SDK, it should, yep, so that you can see the actual information that's being sent back to you. So this is going to work on iOS, Android, Flutter, web, what have you, which is kind of one of the great things about Firebase is that it will work cross-platform with all these different things. So you don't have to have it just set up for one particular kind of app. In regards to how you'd actually use that, oh, I had a slide for all that. Essentially, we have an SDK set up too, so you can just get the Cloud Function instance and then get the HTTPS callable out of this. You're just going to pass in the function name. And since you're already tied into Firebase automatically through the setup that we did earlier, it's going to know to look for exactly your function that has that name. I mean, I just give it a timeout. 30 seconds is probably a long time, but you never know what's going to go wrong. You don't want to keep trying over and over again past that if something does go wrong. And essentially all we're going to do here is use this callable.call. I send in a message and the message count, which would be echoed back to me if I have the function set up that way. And then I just change the state once I have that information back. And all of this is just going to be off on its own asynchronous task. Another cool thing that actually just came out this last summer are these extensions. I'm actually pretty excited about these. So these are already pre-made functions for people that just want to throw them in. So if you're making a rapid prototype and you know, hey, I'm going to need to do image resizing or something of that sort, there's no reason to rewrite that function if it's already available. So we have that. We have exporting collections to BigQuery, setting off emails automatically for your users, completely wiping out users' information for them if they have security requests or whatnot, some stuff with MailChimp. And let's see, where do we have all of the extensions? We actually have dozens of them, I thought. If not, it's coming up on, so it's about a dozen right now. But we're constantly adding to these. We also have this translate text one, which is really cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just set that one up because I haven't done this one in a good minute here. Let's see if it works. I said it might actually just be really weird, so I'm not going to mess with that right now. That's all right. So yeah, those are just kind of out-of-the-box functions that are automatically available for you. So if you needed image resizing for a social media app or something that's just uploading images, it's just right there for you. And then what will happen is it'll take images that are uploaded to a particular directory in Firebase storage, resize them, and then put those resized images in another directory for you so that they're accessible. And then you're not constantly trying to show the user gigantic 5 megapixel whatever images when all you want to do is show them a thumbnail. App distribution, I'm not going to get into this one too much. This is actually a holdover from earlier, but if you have multiple users that are using your app while you're developing it, so like in your hackathon situation, if you had a designer on your team or somebody who wasn't a developer and they weren't there in person where you can just install directly on their device, you can upload your APK or IPA up on app distribution. And what will happen is you can basically say, hey, here's this user's email address. I want to send them this install file. And then they'll get a deep link for it, and then they can just install your APK file or IPA directly on their device without having to go through a whole IDE and all of that process. It also automatically integrates in with Crashlytics, which is great. So if your users that are testing for you have crashes, you'll automatically get that information on what's broken, what needs to be fixed, and some other analytics that goes with it. And I think this was the last one I was going to talk about out of the build tools. But this is ML, or Firebase ML. So this is basically how you're going to run cloud machine learning on here using the Firebase SDKs in Flutter. So we have a lot of out-of-the-box ones that are already available. So face detection, labeling, reading text, some other great things like that. You can also upload your own custom models from TensorFlow up onto Firebase, or if you use like AutoML out of Google Cloud, then you can run those with your device as well. So the code for that, relatively straightforward. Basically, you're going to pass in the image that you'd have to get from outside of this into a method like this. You give the image rotation just to make sure that everything is aligned properly for the ML process. And then you just get a instance of Firebase Vision, grab the labeler that you're going to want. So in this case, I'm actually going to label the items that are on there. And then you can just call process image. And what this will do is just run through all of the math and whatnot for image planes and rotation, all that from the byte stream, and then it'll return those labels for you. So for this case, I'm going to just come back here. Add my picture scanner. I'm going to say OK. So I have a QR scanner on here. I actually have some chickens in the backyard. So I'm going to just use them because it's always a fun one. As soon as it decides to load, scan them. So I'm going to use the cloud labeler. And what this is going to do is just going to say, hey, here's the percentage chance that you have a chicken, bird, fowl, rooster, poultry, what have you. And it's going to give you the percentage of confidence. So it's 99 point whatever percent confident that it's looking at a chicken, down to 53% that it's looking at a chicken coop. So it's kind of nice that you can just fairly easily out of the box have machine learning available through the SDK. And then if you're working on like a hackathon project, for whatever reason, judges like love it when you have machine learning put into your projects. So it's kind of nice just to have that available and ready to go.
So that's pretty amazing. How difficult is it to set up the model to actually detect chicken coop?
So that one is actually stock, which is nice. So we have like 10,000 different labels or something in the cloud labeler, which covers most use cases. If you want to do your own custom one, TensorFlow isn't actually too hard to use. It takes some time. You do have to go through like some tutorials to figure out exactly how you're going to run everything and get that set up. Or you can use Cloud AutoML, where essentially what you're going to do is just take whatever images you want to use for training, put them into folders, upload them, and then we'll spend X amount of time just analyzing those to figure out what everything is, like what the key differences are, and then it'll pop out a model for you. So, yep. So it's kind of one of those nice things where things are just getting easier every so often. From the complete mess that machine learning used to be to the less of a mess that it is now.
Yeah. Amazing. Cool.
Yep. Let's see. And then, yeah, I think that was all I had for that. There's a couple links for just resources if anyone's interested. So firebase.com is where all of our actual documentation is. We also have a Firebase channel on YouTube. Everything that's going to be new, especially any kind of new Medium articles or blog posts and whatnot that DevRel is putting out, also comes out on the Twitter channel. And then the plugins and source code and whatnot for Flutterfire is all up on GitHub, completely open source. I'm actually going to pull it up now because why not? Kind of worth knowing all that. It's fully open source, which I like. I actually have been on these a lot lately, just going through the different pull requests because we have a bit of a backlog. So my job is now to fix that. But other issues that come through, if people want to pull anything off of the top there and just kind of work through them, you can. But the packages themselves all can be found on pub.dev, and you can actually import them into as your dependencies and work with them. You can see we have like Firestore functions, all that good stuff. We also have Firebase, Google Ads, Analytics, Crashlytics, what else? Performance, remote config. Some other features that I didn't really talk about in this point, because those are more of your, how do I fix things as they're going wrong? How do I help my users and that sort of thing, which didn't quite pertain to building things quickly. But if you go into any of these packages, you can also find the examples that are in here. Let's see. Yep, so all the code for a basic example is going to be available on here. So if you want to just kind of take whatever's going to work for you and play with it, it's all super easy to get to and accessible. Then we're actually working on the new demos right now. This is actually one of the new demos, which is pretty good. So this is it's basically a movie app, kind of like an IMDb that you can use Firestore with in a Flutter app. Okay. Yep. But yeah, other than that, let's see here. There's my Twitter and email and whatever. If anyone has any questions that they want to reach out about later, if it's something super complex that we need to get into and whatnot. Otherwise, if anyone has questions, I am around.
Hi, Paul. I do have a question.
Yep.
So this is Michael again. So
Yep.
the code that you showed us here, is that available on GitHub for us to take a look at?
A good chunk of it is, but not all of it yet. So what I'm actually, everything that came out of this, if we look at the code here, these are all independent examples that just go into the one product. Whereas what I'm working on is a kind of master app that shows all the Firebase features and how they work together, because there's actually a lot of interconnectivity with like remote config, analytics, and like our dynamic links with authentication and whatnot. Hopefully in the next few weeks, this will all be completely on GitHub though.
Okay. The follow-up, there was a article that was released on May 21st by Yu Chen Chi and Tyler Crow about how to use the Firebase emulator. I thought that was really, really cool. Why I thought that was so cool was when I was working with Firebase, one of the biggest concerns and issues I had is I was working on a back end that was pre-release, so we didn't have any clients or customers yet. But once it started getting clients and customers, I'm sitting there developing and touching the same thing they are, and it's like, oh, that really didn't feel good. And then there's the, okay, do I set up a whole nother Firebase app that's like the dev app and stuff? This Firebase emulator was like, this is so cool because I could run it locally as a developer, pull it in, have it all run. A recommendation I would have to you, if you keep giving this presentation, I think that would be a very valuable point to point out for developers, that you do have this capability of running a Firebase emulator from the project that you're working on locally and not worrying about screwing up the real-time active database or backend that's out there.
Yeah, no, I definitely need to play around with that one some more. The emulator has been around for functions, I believe, for a little while, but we just released it for a whole other slew of products, and I just haven't had the time yet to play with it yet.
Right. Well, this has got the GUI interface, so you bring it up, and I can sit there and see it, and it basically looks so close to the Firebase backend that they highlight several of the color themes throughout the UI with purple, so you know that you're working on your local emulator version versus the blue for the real-time backend.
Gotcha.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wow. Michael, so is it easy then to actually make a copy of your real Firebase database?
Yes, absolutely. It's almost trivial. What's the biggest problem I had with it was I'm not a web developer, so I'm a Flutter developer. So my development environment was not set up for Node.js and Java. it requires those. Those were the two big setup pieces I had to do. Once I got Node.js set up and with a big change with Oracle and Java and finding the right version, that was a little bit of a headache. But once I worked through all that, once I got it running, you sit there and you just type in the command line that you want to run the emulators. It pulls up a window and it uses your local host with a local port on it, and it gives you these. Well, if you, Paul, if you could just go to firebase.googleblog.com, it has the Firebase emulator. It pulls up and blog.com. And this is 2020/5 local Firebase emulator. Let's see.
Okay.
This article. This is if anybody's interested, read this article. This is a great article. If you scroll down, it's a graphical user interface. And so now to copy your database, it comes up empty. But because you can go to a lot of your Firebase elements and say just, download a JSON version of it or whatever, you can load it up in the real-time emulator. And this is just, I can't say enough about what a great tool this is as a developer who's working with Firebase.
Wow. That's awesome. Really good to know.
Yeah, I'll pass that feedback back to Tyler. I actually have a meeting with him tomorrow. So we'd love to hear that. Cool.
Any other questions out there?
I have a question. My name's Nathan. I'm actually going to be rapidly prototyping an app. What resources does Google offer for just average developers that are out there as far as support, things like that? I'm not sure how to facilitate questions.
Let's see. So for that, just on the Flutter side in general, if you don't have a ton of experience with that, I super recommend this Flutter Gallery app, which is essentially just a showcase example of a whole bunch of random stuff, which I actually think I have that running on the emulator as well. And then just the documentation in general for Flutter is absolutely amazing. Let's see, there it is. So what this does, though, is it kind of gives you an example of various widgets that are out there, and then if you see one that you like, you can just kind of copy paste it into your prototype rather than having to go through the whole process of, did I make sure I read the documentation right and did everything else correctly? Of course, my machine wants to take its time for it. But this also has some showcase stuff in there too. So if you wanted to see some animations for a banking app, they have this Rally one. There's this retail app and shopping cart in Shrine, which is pretty great. It also goes over the iOS Cupertino stylings as well as material. So that'd be one place I would start. It's all completely open source, so you can grab it off of GitHub. And then you can just run it on your device as well to see what's going to work for you and what isn't. There's also the Flutter Cookbook. Let's see. Which I use a lot, especially for just general things. So networking is in here, which is pretty great. So this is how you're going to fetch data from a general API that's online, how you would parse JSON data, how you can deal with persistence. There's some good stuff for animations and how to do that, some gestures. But essentially what these are is basically they just give you the code snippets that you can use. And then most of them have this little interactive example area at the bottom. So you can actually run the app from the website of it. And then if you make changes and whatnot, you can see what it's going to look like just through this little sample aspect of it. So this is a ripple effect on here. And I think, so here's this inkwell. I don't think it gives you color. I don't know if it's going to look or not, if they do auto loading or not. I don't know what the key is. I'd have to go look at the actual documentation for it. But yeah, so you can actually put in your changes though, and it'll run, and you can see what it's going to look like before you actually go throwing this into your app. So yeah, I would say the cookbook and the gallery are kind of great starting points, and then just the documentation in general is really good. So if you wanted to know about this inkwell, do a Flutter inkwell search, find that, and just kind of grab whatever you're going to do. And the actual individual components also have that same little working area here, which is kind of nice. What else would I recommend? There's a few other tools. I'm trying to remember what they were. I'm sure they'll come to me after this. But yeah, that's kind of where I would probably start with those things, just along the Flutter side of it. And then for the Firebase side, all of our documentation is at just firebase.com, and then it'll redirect to whatever our official Google name is, at firebase.google.com. And you can follow the tutorials that we have here. We have some code labs. We have the actual Flutterfire library that's out there as well. So you can actually view the examples that are there.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Yep.
And hey, Nathan, there's a ton. If you're looking for like human interaction around Flutter, the community is amazing. I put a link in the chat for the community website, and there is a Slack group in there and a Gitter group, and both are very active. So if you join there, then there's always somebody who can help, almost always.
And then,
Okay, thanks.
on that same note for Firebase, we have the Firebase community Slack as well. A lot of us are on there for answering questions. A lot of people will be super helpful with giving you tutorials and information and whatnot as well. And then we also have support channels that you can do. Let's see. There's support, which takes a little bit more time. So if you're actually working on a rapid prototype, it may not be as useful. But this is where you would go and pick, like, hey, I'm having an issue with database issues and whatnot. They'll kind of help you with some troubleshooting or other questions that you have. So we have a couple different teams that are on 24 hours for this, and it's actual people that will respond to you.
That's cool. So if I may, Paul, I just put up in the chat, you were talking about at the end of your presentation doing Flutter machine learning. There was what I thought was a really interesting article that came out May 22nd about using TensorFlow with Flutter machine learning. This is an article that does text classification for TensorFlow. They talk about that the new TF Lite Flutter package is actually using the Dart FFI, so it's really fast and responsive, which is really cool. Unfortunately, means it's only available for mobile at this time. You can't use it for web and desktop, but still for mobile apps, since it's using Dart FFI, you can get real fast access to it. They've got an interesting case where they're building an app here, and as you type in, it senses whether it's a positive text or if it's got a negative flavor. But it's like you said, machine learning seems real hot, and a lot of people are interested in it. But I thought this was a fascinating article, and I enjoyed reading it and seeing some of the capabilities that, back end with Firebase, TensorFlow, Flutter, another really cool example for Flutter.
Yep. So we're actually built a lot of our stuff on TensorFlow. So I think a lot of this actually applies to what we have working behind the scenes on our SDK too, which is pretty nice. So all this, at least the concepts will carry over, which is fun.
Right. Well, like I said, I thought the Dart FFI support was really kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Okay. Any more questions out there? Okay. Well, if not, Paul, this was a great presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Great job.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I learned some things. I think everybody did. So actually, is your focus just Firebase, or is it other aspects of Flutter as well?
So technically right now it's just Firebase, but I'm in the process of becoming like a Flutter DevRel person as well. So it'll be next on the list.
Okay.
But it's Google bureaucracy.
Yeah, I saw someplace that you listed that you're interested in IoT.
Yep. So I do a fair amount of IoT. Actually, I don't know if I can show you all the stuff here, but like I've got all my components and robots and whatever else around here. I actually worked at Sphero before I started at Google. So I worked on the Star Wars BB-8 robot and did a bunch of Bluetooth stuff for that. And
Oh, you worked for Spiro. Yeah, I knew a bunch of people from NetDevil that went there, which was Lego for a while. A number of people went there, but that's cool. I'm fascinated in the IoT aspects because I think Flutter could be a really good unifier. Because I got deep into Android of Things for a while, and it was like really cool, really great. And then all of a sudden, Google did a Google pullout on it, and it seems like that one just died on the vine. But that's okay. But it does seem like there is a really fascinating opportunity for Flutter to come in and sort of unify a GUI for a lot of these IoT devices to give a nice, really nice, robust, beautiful UI and talk to the hardware and stuff, especially now with Dart FFI, so you can talk into C APIs and stuff. I think the potentials there are, really fascinating, but boy, talk about being on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, so I was actually just playing with that a couple weeks ago. So I was using the Flutter Blue package to actually talk to an ESP32 device. And what I was doing with that is I would read a QR code, it would give me the actual device name. It would connect to that automatically over Bluetooth as long as it was within range by measuring RSSI. And then that would just give me a Firebase URL for the real-time database, and I would use that to actually generate the UI for it. So let me see if I actually have that project on here. Let's see, is it the universal controller? Yeah. So essentially what I was doing is I was just reading off of this real-time database, and this would say, hey, I've got this UID, this is the one I'm pointing at, and it's just going to have a text and a button, or a toggle. And then it would actually run through and parse out all of that and create the widgets dynamically as soon as they were ready, which, let's see here. Let's see how long this is going to take. This doesn't run on the emulator, unfortunately, just because of the Bluetooth.
Sure. Yeah, you sort of have to have the hardware for that.
Yep. Let's see. Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward, which is nice. So I just basically pass that information in, make sure it's not null. And then you just create a list of widgets that are going to be displayed in a list view. And each of these can be independently checking against the view type is coming down from real-time database, and then creates that widget as it's the list. And then it'll just start dynamically setting that up. And as long as you have the information for the characteristic that you want to send from that Flutter app over to the hardware device, it'll just do that all automatically for you, which is pretty nice.
Right.
So you can basically control what any physical device is set up to use this structure from that single Flutter app, and it'll dynamically do the UI for you. So I'm just playing with this recently just because I think it is kind of an interesting problem domain.
Exactly. I've had the same thing. I did a project for Medtronic a couple years back when they were doing various BLE devices on a patient, and it would aggregate those into a collector. And that's what we were using, sort of like a precursor to Android things, and then send it off to the web. And then there was a web app that would actually aggregate all this data and display it at a nurse's station and stuff, which was really fascinating. But, it just, like you said, your mind starts exploding with ideas, because it's like, I read this article about farmers using cattle, and they usually tag them with various BLE devices. And they normally have these huge 3-ring binders with every drug and whatever that the animal has, versus being able to do something with BLE and stuff. And it's like, wow, using Flutter to be able to do like an iPad that could read all those devices, because as the cattle come into the barn at night, they pass through the gate, and there's a reader that collects all this data, and they can, know when a cow is ovulating and stuff to be able to know what to do for it, or if its biometrics are changing, that they have to change its feed, or have a vet come in and see it and stuff. That's why, when you said that, I know we're sort of digressing here, but I saw that in some of your bio background when I saw you were speaking for us, and I thought, oh, somebody else has got an interest in this as well.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Flutter in the IoT realm, and it's just not really been investigated yet, just because so many people treat Flutter as like the UI platform. But once you get Dart and all the other stuff that's available with it, and then you get into the actual metal aspects through platform channels, what have you. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do that you would normally do on iOS or Android, but and you get the UI cross-platform aspect to it.
Yeah, being able to just be platform agnostic is nice, because another whole area is like real estate. Instead of having all the flyers, being able just to walk by a real estate sign that's got just this little disc that's about the size of a quarter, pinging data that sends enough to send the potential buyer out to the real estate information. Like I said, there's so many different ideas on that edge, but I looked at running Flutter on an Android, not an Android, excuse me, a Raspberry Pi and stuff, and it's like,
Yeah.
boy, you're going to be you're out there on the bleeding edge.
We just announced that we're going to be supporting Linux though with that. And I think there's some people that are working with the Raspberry Pi. So there's that.
That would be cool.
Yep. And they're external to
Maybe we
Google.
get have you back for another talk.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Any other questions out there? So really, I mean, this was great. So I hope actually that you come back. We'll have to figure out what your next area of interest is.
Yep.
But this was a great presentation. We learned a lot. I really appreciate it. And everybody that joined, appreciate you tuning in tonight. And I look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Yeah, since you're local, Paul, I hope to see you at more of the Flutter Denver meetups.
Yeah, I've actually been in the last couple of them. I just
Good.
kind of tend to be a fly on the wall.
Ah,
Hey, I'm glad to hear that you're attending.
Yep.
yeah. So anyways, everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.